Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new podcast today with a very special subject, one near and dear to our hearts. The inclusion of the NES, or however you pronounce that, in Romania, in our lives, in our gaming history. And as always, this is a podcast about our experiences with the, things we talk about, not necessarily a totally accurate historical documentary. Again, I am joined by Steven from the channel Nonsense. Hi, Steven.
Hey, Unicom, and good morning, afternoon, evening to our listeners. Yeah, it's our podcast is less of a historical documentary and more of stories from the trenches. I like to think about it.
And currently, at the base, we are being shelled. Well, last week I was being shelled by the microphone that stopped working several times through the recording, and now the internet is dying. So I'm hearing you as R2D2, but hopefully the recording that you are making locally will compensate for that.
Yes, hopefully you know why? It's because of RNGesus. We talked about RNGesus last time, and now everything is fucking up on us. Or at least on you.
And there was that card from the garbled Magic the Gathering translation with the Holy Podcast. So,
Holy Podcast. Yes, we're gonna have to show that one on the
that was an video. That was an odd coincidence. I think RNGesus is out to get us.
There's no coincidences in the universe. It's all chaos.
Mm-hmm. So the NES, I'm gonna make a presumption that you did not own an NES, did you? Like an original NES?
Actually, I did. Yeah.
Oh my god!
But it came way later, much later, after like several years after actually playing the NES clone that we had access to.
So you access it like a normal Romanian. For some reason, I don't trust people that owned NESs like in the early 90s. Because I never understand where they got those.
Because in order to have had that sort of money, meant that first of all you were most likely doing dubious things, and second of all you had access to or you knew someone who visited other countries.
Yeah, you had connections, dubious connections.
Exactly. Well, not necessarily dubious, but connections and some extra cash, like a lot of extra cash. Just as a quick reminder and a quick info history dump for our listeners, both Unicom and myself come from Romania. Romania used to be one of the many countries in Eastern and Southeastern Europe that was behind the Iron Curtain.
We are part of the Soviet bloc.
Yes, we were part of the Soviet bloc that stopped at the end of December 1989. So literally starting from the literal beginning of the 90s, we had access to freedom, basically. We had access to freedom in the 90s because there would be way many more years until we would have access to technology.
Oh, that came a lot later.
Yeah, well, we're gonna talk about that probably in future episodes.
If there's anybody from Brazil listening to this, we're sort of in your situation.
So yeah, at the beginning of the 90s, I estimated that our level of technology was somewhere around 10 to 15 years behind that of Western Europe.
Yep.
Which meant right after the 90s, that's when not right after, that's when we finally got to see more than one channel on the TV.
Oh yeah, we had TVR2.
Yeah, which was and we got to watch movies, American capitalist movies. And
the first non-state owned television channel was a channel called TV7 ABC, and that's when we first saw Knight Rider.
Yeah, well, that's when we first saw Knight Rider and
the A-Team, I think, as well.
Yeah, the original Star Trek. They had the original Star Trek, and that most
I think it fell down.
Something fell down. The fuck? And the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
Oh yeah, I love that show.
That was great. It still is actually. But yeah, the idea being that whilst the rest of the world had access to the Nintendo Entertainment System or NES since around 1985, I mean the Western world, because in Japan it was launched earlier, we would only get access to not the NES per se, but a hardware clone of it, sometime starting with around the mid 90s actually.
So for context, for those who still don't have a proper picture, if you've seen the movie Eurotrip, imagine the Bratislava part. That's Romania.
In 1990.
And bits of it still are.
Yeah, well, that's a different discussion altogether. So yeah, there was a huge difference in the level of technology that we had access to. So while we would actually see commercials on foreign channels for things like the Super Nintendo or the Sega Mega Drive 2.
Oh, there was even we had the Mickey Mouse comic, and they did have Super Nintendo commercials in it, and even N64 commercials in it.
Yeah, so whilst we would see commercials for those platforms, no one in the majority, 96% of the population, could either have access to them or actually have the finances to buy them.
Yeah, maybe people in the capital or in Cluj or in like the major big cities could afford, but us in the backwoods of Eastern Europe, Eastern Romania and Eastern Europe, no, not so much.
So we got something called, and we shit you not, the Terminator.
I'm curious, what color was your Terminator?
All of the Terminators I've seen were that black with blue buttons.
That absolutely drives me mad because I had a red one. And I think it was unique. I don't have it anymore. I gave it to a cousin who lives in the countryside and he lost it or something got stolen. And it was red. And the gamepads it came with, one was red and one was gray. And the box had Arnold Schwarzenegger from the Terminator 2 movie with a reflection of the White House in his glasses.
Yeah, whoa, you got in a sea of Chinese knockoffs, you got the knockoff of the knockoffs.
I know that was a premium knockoff.
I think that was they just had random parts together. Maybe you had the prototype or some shit.
I don't know. We didn't have any pre-installed games, and the game that my brother did buy with it was one of the worst games ever made. Urban Champion. Capcom's Urban Champion. You will not believe that the company that made Street Fighter started out by making Urban Champion. It boggles the mind.
Everybody has to start somewhere. So, but that's not all, because the console wasn't just called the Terminator. It's actually called the Terminator 2.
Actually, I think mine was 4.
Yours was 4. Well, the idea is it literally had Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator on the box. Yep. That was the cover, and it actually on the outside looked like a Sega Mega Drive 2 or a Sega Genesis, more or less. The controllers definitely looked like that. They had those teardrop curved sort of approach,
and they had 4 buttons.
Yeah. Well, it depends. I've known some with, but yeah, generally 4. But it was on the inside, it was a hardware clone of the NES, or granted the Famicom.
The Famicom. I had a neighbor before I moved away. Before I lived here, I used to live at a house, and I had neighbors that we played all day. And he got one day, I think he had a Sega knockoff, because it sort of looked like what the Terminators ended up looking as. But later he got what I think was a Famicom complete knockoff, because it looked like a Famicom, but it was blue.
Yeah, the blue is a knockoff. I had a Famicom, but it was actually red, and it said Nintendo on all of the valid parts and stuff like that.
Yeah, it even had the square NES type controllers, but they also had 4 buttons.
Yeah,
so, it was a knockoff. Oh, and it had a bunch of pre-installed games in it.
Definitely a knockoff. So the idea is that apparently I did a tiny amount of research before starting this. So what was labeled as the Terminator in Romania might have actually been called
The Ending
as
Man.
the Ending Man in a bunch of other ex-Soviet bloc countries, including Poland, Slovakia, Serbia, Croatia, Bulgaria, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Albania, Montenegro, and Hungary. And there is also India and Kenya here, but it's not. We're focusing on Eastern Europe here.
Basically everywhere where people could not really afford proper games that were available to the general public back then.
Also places that didn't have access to the international markets up until the 1990s.
Yeah. So I'm curious, what year did you get your Terminator?
Oh, I can't. So I've never had a Terminator. I actually had a Famicom, but that one came much later. I played it. Thankfully I had neighbor friends who had it, so I would play with their Terminators over at their place, which sounds kind of euphemistic, but it's not. It's literally that. I can't really say when I got mine. I know for sure I had it in. I know for sure I played the shit out of it in 7th grade. So that must have been around 97, actually 98.
That's around what I got mine as well.
So I definitely had it around then, but I played with Terminators earlier than that, but not that much earlier, maybe a couple of years. I think I want to say maybe sometime around the 95 mark, literally mid 90s.
Well, the console was out since 92, so it had been on the market for a while before we started playing.
It might have been, but there's also, it might have been on the overall in the market, but until it got to our neck of the woods and until we got access to it,
I think some time.
Yeah, I think it was more around literally in the mid 90s. So whilst the Americans and Western Europe were getting their Super Nintendos or Sega Mega Drive 2s, we were barely starting our journey into 8-bit gaming.
Yeah, and we, like individual like me and you, we got our things like when the N64 was already out.
Yeah, it was a weird time to live in, or actually it was great because we were very aware of the fact that for us, whilst life was hard, it was much better than it was for if we would have still been under communist rule.
Oh yeah.
So from that point of view, just simply being able to see those commercials on TV was a success, was something to celebrate. So I was never I appreciated the level of technology I had. I always appreciated it quite a bit.
It was around the time that I believe Reboot, the TV series, started airing on Pro TV as well.
Yeah, that was definitely a thing. This was always computers, and you have to keep in mind that so our access to technology was we were very behind the rest of Europe, both due to political reasons and also due to then when the political reasons disappeared, financial reasons, because the
we were broke.
Yeah, because the post-communist economies, there were non-existent basically. Mm-hmm. So even if we had access, we had the potential to get the things. Now we didn't have the money.
My dad worked in the Ukraine. He helped build some of the industrial mills in Krivoy Rog for a while. And he came back from there with some old computers that we only got 2 of them to actually work as they weren't complete. One of them was sort of a HC, as we call it, a home computer, like a Spectrum clone.
Yeah,
it didn't really work all that well. You didn't have a proper interface for a cassette player to play games or load the programs. And he also had a what I've learned in the past couple of years is a clone of the PDP-10, like the mainframe computer that's meant to like run a single box.
Okay,
It was all in Russian, and I only managed to access like by mistake a text edit mode where you could actually write and draw things. There was no idea of save. Well, it did have cartridge slots that you sort of needed special cartridges for it or extension boards, so I didn't have access to any of those. But I sort of tried to make games on that by just drawing maps and putting units on them and then redrawing them again every time I turned on.
Yeah, and as a means to put things in perspective, the previous level of technology that we had before the Terminator clones, which if you say Terminator clones sounds as like a completely other thing, was Spectrum ZX clones.
Oh yeah, we had a lot of them.
We had a lot of those. And
the Ice Felix, that was a very, very popular series.
The story behind those is actually quite fascinating, and I think we're gonna have to do an episode once on those as well. But just the short is that these were very low memory machines that could run BASIC. So you could write programs in BASIC and could play a bunch of decent games, let's say, for that time.
I had a tape with Elite on it, but it didn't work the interface didn't work that well, and most of the programs did not load properly.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. I actually played Elite on my Spectrum ZX clone, but again, separate episode, separate history episode. So that was and I can't even give our listeners examples of games because the Spectrum ZX game era was more of a thing just in Europe or mostly in the UK. Because over in the US they had the Commodore, which is still the most successful computer ever made. Yeah, which granted the Commodore 64 was kinda in the same generation, but it was capable of doing some cooler things. So I can't really give them. Space Invaders or Galaga. That was the level of gaming that we had, and
we also had things like Target Renegade.
We jumped from Space Invaders or Galaga style games to Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah, it wasn't a big leap.
That really blew a lot of our minds because we were able to play Super Mario Brothers, this game that we usually saw on characters in movies play. And that sort of
on
stuff.
The Wizard. I think they showed The Wizard on TVR1 or Pro TV like early in the 90s.
I got to see The Wizard on one of the foreign channels we had up until then on one of the Italian foreign channels.
Yeah, I think it was on Pro7.
That's German, by the way.
I know.
So it might have been. I mean, it surely might have been. So, but yeah, in the Wizard we saw like Super Mario Brothers 3 already. That was 3. No, but you would see like small mentions here and there and small things in some other movies, or just commercials or references in pop culture and shit like that. And being able to play it and actually listen to the music and play the goddamn thing so much that the console would overheat and start corrupting the game.
Really?
Oh yeah.
I never had that issue.
No, whenever we did, so there was a bunch of us that would gather in the console wielding neighbor's house, and we'd play it for like 8 hours straight.
Oh yeah, I never did that.
No,
my parents wouldn't let me.
There was literally there was no break, nothing. No, so we would play it from early morning till early evening.
I'm curious, did that version of the Terminator come with like a wireless antenna attachment? Because mine came with 2. Like you put one in the console and one in the TV, and it worked.
I don't know. I think it had something of that nature, but I'm not sure. It did come with a light gun though, which was useless.
Yeah. Actually, no, because you could play Hogan's Alley and stuff like that. My mom always said, "Don't use it because you're gonna shoot the television until break."
Yeah.
She didn't understand how it worked.
Okay. Well, to be honest, a lot of people didn't understand how it worked.
Yeah.
But I've never had one that worked. I've never seen one that works properly, so I was never near. And my dad's an amateur. Well, he's an electrician, but he's also an amateur hobbyist when it comes to working with electronics. And I gave it to him, and he tried his best to actually make it work, and he corrected some things and he amplified some things, but it would still not really function as it was supposed to.
I'm curious, the TV on which you played those games, was it actually properly functional?
Generally, yeah. I don't think we ever played it on shit TVs.
Because when I got mine, we didn't have a great TV. Like, it looked okay, but when you put the games on it, they had the wrong colors. Because it was sort of dying. We had to replace the tube a couple of years later because it just died. Also had to replace it completely later because bits of it started falling off. It didn't look all that great, and for the most part, I had very, very bad sound.
Yeah, that sounds like it was a problem with the TV dying, in general, and age. But no, we generally played it on decent enough cathode ray tubes.
But on the bright side, it sort of made the graphics look fuzzier and less pixelated, so that I remember them looking better than they were.
Well, keep in mind, it was the cables weren't necessarily that long, but they were long enough. You could sit at a decent enough distance from the screen, so that wasn't a problem. But back then, we had no concept of this. This is what games was. There was nothing. I mean,
there was Cybernet on TV. I know how Tomb Raider looked on TV.
Yeah, we saw how other games were, but as far as I was concerned, this was already pretty advanced compared to the Spectrum ZX games.
Also, I had played Bad Dudes on an arcade system once, and that blew me, just exploded my brain.
It blew you away, it didn't blow you.
Yeah.
Arcade systems. We had enough sense to understand that was basically a refrigerator-sized box of computing power.
When I played that arcade game, I didn't have a color TV, so just seeing the colors and I just blew my mind.
Exactly. Yeah, that's something completely different. But there is other. One of the great things after a while relating to the Terminator 2 clone is that there was so many of them that you wouldn't even actually, because you have to. These were illegal technically. They were contraband. There wasn't a legal way of. You couldn't find these in stores. Where you found them was usually.
No, actually, the one I bought was from a store, like from a legit store.
Well, the one I got was from a legit store also, but because it was an actual Famicom. But usually, if you live in a large enough city, once a week there tends to be an area around the city, somewhere on the outskirts of the city, where there is like a huge sort of a flea market that pops up. It's not people sell old things, obviously, but they also sell contraband. One type of contraband was the Terminator clone, but you could also buy tobacco contraband products. And
sort of like a bazaar, if you will.
Yeah, but with a lot of bazaar/flea market. There was not a legal, it was not an authorized shop there to see, except for the places that sold beer and food. So you'd go as a youngest child with your parents, obviously, to this area more or less, and the sellers of both consoles and cartridges, and we'll get to cartridges now, they would literally have TVs set up so that you could test out the console, so that so that you knew it worked, and also that you could test out the game that you would want to purchase. This was insane. There were like several of these all around this place, and they had TVs and generators and shit like that. So that was, it became for several years, this was its own niche underground market.
Well, in my city, it wasn't really underground. Like, it was an established thing that in the Russian market, how we call it, there used to be Russians there at one time. There weren't anymore, but the name stayed. You would go there to buy all sorts of knickknacks. Like, you needed a spare tire for your bike, go there. You needed some, I don't know, type of screws, go there. You needed some clocks, go there. You needed game cartridges, go there. And again, you had people with the TV, with the console already set up. You could even like trade in cartridges, like for a low price.
Yeah, that happened. That was a thing for me as well. The only reason it was like that is because the cartridges we got were knockoffs as well.
Oh yeah, there were. We never got the kind of cartridge that let you save a game because those were expensive to make. Those required a battery inside and extra chips to actually keep the memory, like keep the save games. Those were too expensive to make, so nobody would sell those. Nobody would make those. We did not have access to games like Zelda, like Metroid, or anything that required a save game.
Yeah, which was, I mean, at the time we didn't know this.
Mm-hmm.
At the time we weren't aware that these games actually existed because they weren't really talked about really on TV or in magazines. There was maybe one computer game-ish magazine, and that came out later, and it was focused on PC games anyway.
Like, I heard about Zelda because there was that bit in Captain N the Game Master with Zelda, but Metroid I had no idea about it like until like 2002 or 2003 or something.
Yeah, we would find out about these other classics, like literally classics of their genre and parts of gaming history. We only found out about them much later, granted, basically after we got proper internet.
Also, because these games were illegal, we also had like different kind of things that you would not see on a Famicom or on an NES. We had the 100 games in one things that not only had a bunch of games in them, but had hacks of those games.
Yeah, those were, so we'd get cartridges that had like 100 games or 1,000 games or 9,999,999 in one, and they would basically have maybe 10 games, let's say, optimistically, and then they would have like 90 variations of the same game. So if it had Tetris, it had the basic Tetris, and then it had the Tetris that started from level 2, and then it had the Tetris that started from level 3, and then it had Tetris with changed colors or similar. The other games also had changed skins. Some of them had, like you said,
different levels even.
Different levels and cheats activated and hacks.
Like I think I had like 20 Mario games on cartridge with different levels. A lot of them were water-based for some reason.
Yeah, that was a thing. Also relating to Super Mario Brothers, great discovery from whoever discovered that at the end of the first world you can jump and then go to the warp.
Yeah,
that was I knew about that because I saw it like at some family friend or something, and then I did that with my friends who had no idea they could do that, and that just opened up the entire game for them.
Also, one extra advantage is that by the time we got our clones of the NES, people were making homebrews. And there's one game in particular, we called it Jewels, I think that's what our version was called, but it's actually called Magic Jewelry. Was an unlicensed game that somebody just made for the NES, and it is basically, how do I put this, it's the Bejeweled. It's literally Bejeweled, and we used to play it. The entire family used to play it like non-stop.
I don't know. I've never. I don't remember getting that, to be honest.
It's sort of like a mix between Tetris and Bejeweled, because you would have falling blocks with different colors that you could swap, like the individual pieces of them, and you had to match them. And it had a background with the Statue of Liberty and some buildings, and it didn't have music on that television because the television was kind of borked. But it was a great game, and that's I believe that's where Bejeweled started from.
Might just as well be, man. Yeah, I never really got that, to be honest.
It's a relaxing thing to play. Like my parents enjoyed it especially.
That's always nice. Some way of getting them into gaming, I guess.
And also we got games that shouldn't be on the NES. I had no idea, but Street Fighter 2 wasn't officially on the NES, but I played it on the Terminator.
Yeah, a very horrible, stripped-down version of it.
Yeah, the characters look kind of meh, and I barely remember if there was a difference between Ryu and Ken, but it was playable.
That's an argument that still exists up until this day.
Yeah. Like because of the color, also the colors were reduced compared to the SNES version. Also because my TV looked horrible, they all look kind of the same. But it worked. Like it actually functioned. It wasn't superb, but it worked. Also, I'm not entirely sure, but I don't think Mortal Kombat had an official version for the NES. It sort of came out when the SNES was already kind of almost out. And the same goes for, there was a tournament game with the Ninja Turtles. I'm not sure if that one had an official NES version, but I played that. I played like for almost a day with a friend of mine.
Oh, I know the tournament one with the Turtles, played the shit out of that one. And I also played the Mortal Kombat shitty version of it. Yeah, people, they did that. Granted, it was also, we had access to them because of the knockoff nature of things. But yeah, those were interesting times, man. And also it was cool because I would hear about some people having problems with their consoles. But to be honest, these things were bomb-proof.
Yeah.
I mean, bashing, smashing, because they had like just a couple of like one or two. There were basically like a couple of cards in them with everything being with integrated circuits. So there was nothing loose. There was nothing. These things would take a lot of punishment, and even if it would break, it was not expensive to replace.
Well, I never had like any problems with it, though it's actually kind of funny to say that because before it I had a clone of the Atari console, the Atari 2600. I got it like in 95. My dad sent it from the Ukraine, and it also had a lot of pre-installed games, but that thing used to break like once a year, and we had to always replace like a fuse in it. That always went bust for some reason.
The Atari clones and whatnot, those were considerably more complicated pieces of tech, older tech in general. So
they were just like worse made.
Yeah. Could also be that, sure. The only things that really did fuck up around a lot were the controllers.
Oh yeah, we like the colored ones just broke like within a year.
Those.
I think we went through 4 sets of them by the end.
At a certain point, I was so annoyed with the I had a problem with the cables, actually. The cables, and granted, this wasn't a clone, but whatever. So at a certain point, I was so annoyed with it that I asked my dad to hardwire the controllers to the fucking console. So, and then he was my dad, so he didn't have a lot of choice. So he painstakingly took the controller and checked which pin goes to which head and whatnot, and then he soldered the cables from the controllers to the actual console, so that there was never a problem with the controllers from that point onwards.
we mostly like we had problems with the buttons failing. We tried to replace like the membrane thing, but it didn't always work, and sometimes just you would get cables broken like on the controller side because we used to wrench them like out of the by mistake when we played. We went well out of them.
So
And I remember when I wanted to buy a replacement, I also saw a version that had 6 buttons, and I think that was for a Sega, for a Genesis.
most maybe. I'm just gonna say most maybe.
But then again, it could have been just a version for this, and the other buttons could have been just like markers for something else.
And just nothing
Yeah.
extra. So what are some of the standout memories of games you had relating to the Terminator?
Oh, probably playing Bad Dudes, the NES version at night, and Street Fighter 2 at night as well. Because my monitor my television didn't see that well. All the games were sort of dark and moody and at a point scary.
I see.
And also I had like Ghosts and Goblins or Ghosts and Ghouls, the first one, for 2 days. I played it almost entirely for those 2 days. Never finished it. Like never. No, I'm gonna state that. Never got past the second level.
Yeah, because Ghosts and Goblins is a classic difficult game, like super hardcore game.
It took me 1 day to get to the second level.
Yep. It's not for the faint of heart, to be sure, because it's a one hit and you get downgraded, and the next hit you're dead. That's it. That's all you get.
So I really enjoy playing cooperative, Double Dragon and Battletoads game. That was one of my favorites.
Those were fun as well.
Yeah, well, the first Battletoads as well was fun up until the bit with the crashing into the barriers with the high speed.
The high speed thing that was.
But
annoying.
I really enjoyed because the game had friendly fire. You could just squash your friend over the head and just laugh and laugh and laugh. It was so enjoyable.
It was it was a pretty solid game, to be honest, even by today's standards.
I did have a sort of a difficulty ramp that just went to
apparently again, finding out much later that the later levels are just out of this fucking world in terms of difficulty.
Yep. What else was there? I think there was a boxing game that was sort of RPG-ish in nature, because after every fight you would gain skill points and you could invest them in your boxer to get better skills.
I don't think I ever got that one.
Oh, and also had the not the Power Rangers game, but the
I remember
the Super
that one.
Sentai that was on which Power Ranger was based on.
I played the shit out of that.
Yeah, because because we had knockoffs, it was in Japanese. Like most of the games I played were in Japanese.
Yeah, a lot of the games, I forgot to mention this, that quite a few of the games we got were in Japanese.
Yeah, and that game especially had dialogue options, which led to like ping pong between the Megazord and that Dragon Sword.
Weird shit. But
just have to remember what they were.
We were kids and we had time to burn, so we had time to try all of the options.
Yeah. Also had the Kunio-kun. I'm not exactly sure what the proper name is for it. It's the one where the kids, well, they weren't a kid, but they fight with other people like in an arena, and you had special attacks you could use.
Oh yeah, I remember that. I played the shit out of that. And then there was a similar one. It was a dodgeball one.
Yeah, and there was one with soccer as well.
With the same characters. Yeah, no, I remember I know the one you're talking about, and that was fun as hell, man. That was fun as shit to play with someone else, obviously.
I remember at the end of it where the character would just run like into the sunset and keep running. It was such a beautiful thing to see.
Some of the more important and like memories I still have from particular games that I played on the NES was I actually enjoyed that Spider-Man game.
Never had that one.
Spider-Man and the Sinister Six, or versus the Sinister Six, or something like that.
Yeah, my friend who had the Famicom knockoff had it, and I think I played it at his home.
Yeah, so I remember playing that at night and stuff, and there were some stages that had like really spooky music and stuff. So that was a thing. Playing tanks.
Oh
tank.
yeah, I love creating levels in that game
with friends. That was always a great and fun experience. But most likely my fondest memory of playing games on the NES was actually managing to finish Prince of Persia.
Oh, you had the NES version of it?
I had the NES version of Prince 1, we called it. Wow. Prince of Persia. And I always loved the game. I knew that people played it on the computer as well, because we had neighbors and stuff. But they didn't have it at their home. It was like computers at the places where their parents worked and that sort of stuff. So I knew about it. And I really loved playing it. But the friends that had the cartridge, they didn't have the patience for Prince, because Prince 1, the first Prince of Persia, is a very trial and error sort of game. Mm-hmm. For instance, there is a spot at a certain point in a level where, in order for you to progress, you basically have to climb around 3 TV screens and then jump into nothingness, and you have to fall for about 2 TV screens, and then the prince will actually catch onto a ledge. That's the only way to progress. You know you have to do it. You kind of get the sense of it, but until you actually get the courage up to go as high as possible and then just literally jump into nothingness after spending who knows how much time getting there, because it's not like it was just a climb. It was a prince climb, which meant traps and trapdoors and spikes and shit. That was one crazy part of the game. And for that time, I was the only person I knew who had ever finished it. I didn't know anyone else who finished the first Prince of Persia. At least in my limited amount of people I knew when I was in 7th grade, basically. And ever since that, I mean, you have to imagine, I played that game a lot. In order to finish it on the NES, you had, thankfully, after you successfully finished the stage, you got the password.
Yeah, so I don't think I got passwords for Ghosts and Goblins.
I don't know if that one had them anyway, but Prince sure as shit did. So I remember spending days on levels, just literally days on one level, trying to find a solution, or just thinking about it, or just trying things. So yeah, that's why Prince of Persia, the first one, has a super special place in my heart and in my gaming history, because it's such a tough game to beat. At least I think, or at least it was for me back then. It's a big part of who I am as a gamer.
I just remember something. You mentioned tanks. I think it was 98. We went to the circus that day. There was a very funny bit because the bleachers that were behind us, on which people were sitting on, they broke during the show.
Jesus.
They weren't far off from the ground, but just some people were left hanging a bit, and they awkwardly got back up. But we came back home, and I played some tanks with my brother, and I remember vividly the best, the sort of chart-topping song at the time was Nana's "He's Coming." is
Oh,
coming.
I
Yeah.
I love the shit of that. Out
Yeah,
of that song.
that song was just the soundtrack for that day on playing tanks. I'm playing Battle City, and so many memories. And Circus
Great-
Charlie. Did you play
great
Circus
stuff.
Charlie?
I think I did. Was it the one that started on
With
a
you on the back of lion, you jumping through hoops.
yeah, and then it got to a ball and shit like that.
Yeah, such a funny game. And Adventure Island, man, Adventure Island.
One other game that I really liked was Young Indiana Jones. That was cool.
Oh, I didn't play that one.
No, that was really cool. And there's a game I still think about today. I don't have that many memories of it because it was one of those Japanese language games, and the entire thing is very anime and Japanesey. Basically, this one guy who knows martial arts, and he has access to some special moves, and you just go around fighting monsters. And usually, each monster you need to use a special move, a separate special move for each monster you meet.
Sounds really cool.
In my memory it is, but I have no idea what the game is called, and I can't give you any sort of detail except that in the cutscene, because cutscenes in the intro cutscene, they were speaking English, like some really badly translated English. And there was a part of like so you're the protagonist, but you're a kid or a teenager, and your dad or someone like that comes to protect you from some skeletons, I think, and he gets killed, and then you somehow get away, and the dad says something like, "My steel is no good against these monsters. You need to use your martial arts." Or something like that. That's the only memory. That's the only thing I have. But that's very little to go on. I'm quite aware of.
You could try posting in that Reddit thing with lost games or something. I don't know what it was called.
Oh, you know what we you know what really didn't make it at all. I never got to play any of the Castlevania games.
Yeah, me neither. But I did play Legend of Cage, and that was awesome.
And I was really annoyed because Castlevania games were the exact type of game that I would have totally loved to have had back then.
Apart from the second one. You know the second one,
Because
right?
it's a horrible night to have a curse. I probably would have played that one as well.
Yeah, and to progress, you have to know something very specific that's impossible to guess if you don't buy Nintendo Power to actually read the walkthrough.
Yeah, true that. So probably not the second one, but definitely the first one. Because I played it a bunch of years back on an emulator, and I just simply don't have that type of patience anymore. I don't have that type of time or that type of patience. But it's a cool ass game. It really is, and the music, dun, 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 super awesome.
Did Mega Man have a save system? Because we didn't have any Mega Man where I was in.
I don't think Mega Man has it. We didn't have it. You're right, but I don't think it had a save system. Don't really think so. Not sure. Really not sure. But we didn't have. Yeah, there's a bunch of super duper classics that we did not know about. So Castlevania, we had no idea about. Legend of Zelda, no. Metroid, as you mentioned. Mega Man, also no.
And at the time we had the cartoon on Prima TV, the Mega Man cartoon that looked amazing. Like the intro to that show, sort of is just astonishing. It sort of looks like RoboCop in the way it's drawn and the way the characters look. It was very gritty, like the intro at least, very high action.
But on the other hand, we did get to play some things that the official legal parts of the West didn't, because I doubt they had no need for them. They had no need for them, to be honest.
We had bootlegs over bootlegs. Like, who cares what's supposed to be released or not? We had them all, apart from the ones that require save games.
Yes, unfortunately. And I think it's actually now, considering that nostalgia has become such a thing, like gaming nostalgia and gadget IT nostalgia. Most likely because most of us that grew up in that period of late 80s, beginning of 90s are now like over 30, and we have a bit more extra cash in general, and we don't really not a big fan, not big fans of what's happening in a lot of domains. So I actually think there's a sort of a cult nostalgic resurgence of I mean, there's definitely a resurgence of retro gaming systems in the US. For there has been one for quite a while. We can see this in the gaming industry also, with all the pixel art inspired and old schoolish type of springboards that some people are using, either in terms of aesthetics, mostly aesthetics, because you have more powers and more power and features in games. But I think I think the Terminator will be back. I think he never left, actually.
I may be wrong, because I think they're still making them, at least. I mean, I know that they're still making the Game and Watch type things. They're still being made.
Yeah, so I don't think, I mean, sure, now we have, thankfully, decent chunk of the population now has access to affordable computers and tablets and smartphones and that sort of stuff. But
At the same time, you still have like the brick game, the 9,991 and one brick game. Those are still being sold.
Yeah, well, granted, we have a bunch of like Chinese stores that sell Chinese-made knockoffs, which you haven't lived until you go through one of those stores and see the 5 different Lego knockoffs. Technically, they're not knockoffs because they're the patent disappeared like in the 80s. But yeah, just as a by the by. So I wouldn't be surprised to actually for the Terminator to restart appearing here and there in pop culture and in gaming circles.
Now, if I could actually track down the original one I had, which either in an attic somewhere lost or hopefully not in a landfill, I may try and, I don't know, kickstart a new wave of Terminator clones.
Most likely. It most likely still is somewhere, somehow. Or, someone just accidentally fucked it up.
Hopefully it's not that complicated. I mean, hopefully somebody's still enjoying it, and even if it's just a rat using it as a nest or something.
Technically, Jesus. Technically speaking, I think they would still function. I mean,
probably because there was a lot of electronics in them. Like,
yeah, the NES, there's NESs that still work perfectly.
Like, I'm looking at the simple version of it. There's the I/O, there's a cable going to the cartridge, and there's not a cable going to the buttons. That's it.
Yeah. It would be cool.
It's like you could fit, in terms of size, it's like 2.5 Raspberry Pis.
Yeah. You could actually, I mean, you don't need, sure, you can emulate with a Raspberry Pi anything.
Oh, absolutely. There is a Romanian company actually was selling Raspberry Pis with the sort of 9,000 NES, all the NES games in them.
Okay, you can make that. You can make that. I've been thinking
easily emulatable.
Yeah, I could. I was thinking about making myself one of those things sometime, but I'm like,
and of course, Nintendo
lazy.
itself is doing the exact same thing.
Yes, they are. Isn't that a great sign of the retro resurgence as it is? As I was just talking about, it completely slipped my mind. Yeah, and they've done the Super Nintendo as well. And you remember at a certain point they said like, oh, we're not making any more NESs, and as in
their
the
value
NES,
shot up like mad.
The NES Mini thing, and I think they started making them again.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure they started making them again. Yeah,
but it's kind of sad that they're making them with a fixed number of games that you can never add to.
Yeah. It's an. I mean, you'd buy that only as a. I would buy that not for myself. I'd buy that as a present for an equally 30-something gamer friend of mine. Not to actually use it, but just to have it. So I would buy it just as a collector because I like to collect things. Otherwise, I would, if I'd have the time and inclination, I would just make myself a Raspberry Pi emulator and play whatever the fuck I want, and get a 3D
A 3D printed case.
a 3D printed case and have something pretty much similar. But I wouldn't get a 3D printed case because that would be too big. I would actually just get one big enough to fit the Pi in and get enough cooling.
Yeah, like the mini version that Nintendo made.
The mini, like super mini version. So I would do that.
I really like that Nintendo for the SNES made different versions for the US and Europe. Because if you don't know, Europe did not have the ugly and completely hideously looking SNES that we had in the US.
Yeah,
Europe had a clone, like a copy of the Famicom, like with rounded corners, with color on them. It looked beautiful.
It
did.
did.
Looks fantastic.
It's weird because that like blocky gray design was something that was specific to Soviet era buildings.
Yeah, and somehow it made its way into the US. I think they said like one of the reasons was so kids could put bowls of cereals on it, because apparently that was a thing.
I actually think that kind of makes a bunch of sense.
Why would you why would you put milk next to electronics?
Because
it's inviting danger.
Also, it would heat up the milk, so that's not a great idea if you're eating cereal. But one cool thing about the Famicom, because I did have a Famicom is that on its the console on its side sides had what looked like they looked like some sort of decorative spaces. They were like these curved, nice spaces and stuff. Until at a certain point, for whatever reason, I was looking at my controller, and then I was looking at the console, and I was looking at the edges of the controller and on the design of the things.
And suddenly, like when you saw for the first time a map of Africa and South America, and realized, oh my god, they fit.
Yeah, they fit. So the you could actually put the game controller slotted into the console so that they wouldn't occupy space on the floor, and you wouldn't get like stumble or step on them or stuff like that.
Imagine if modern consoles still did that.
That's man, but that's just a great example of Japanese design, because it's a well-known fact. They have small houses. They don't have a lot of room, so that's why all of their technology and all the technology that's been it's miniaturized, and everything is compacted and it's meant to occupy as little space as possible. That's a brilliant piece of design, because that's just clean out design, because it's not like, oh shit, we need all of this space and where do we get the extra. No, it's like they didn't need any of the space. It was just so that it looked big enough, and it wasn't just small and easily breakable or forgettable.
And to think all these games that we enjoyed were basically run on a processor made in 1975. The MOS Technology 6502.
That fucking boggles the mind, man.
Yeah.
That
CPU basically made computing as it is.
Yeah, and the idea being that initially it was part of mainframes and the beginning parts of home computing at a certain point, and then the technology advanced to such an extent that it became basically a toy.
Mm-hmm.
If you boil things down, it was basically a toy, because not a lot of adults played on consoles back then. We play on consoles now because we're the kids that grew up with those consoles. But adults weren't that big into them. As far as they were concerned, they were buying their kids a toy.
Yeah, because they used to be in the toy aisle.
A toy that would rot their brains and destroy their eyesight, but a toy nonetheless.
Yeah, it's something to keep them busy, parenting by remote control.
Also, but developed decent enough hand-eye coordination.
Yeah.
Must it, and reflexes, and those sort of push buttony reflexes. What was the and it's an interesting thing. So, as I said initially, we had those of us who were lucky enough to actually have a computer in their house. We had a Spectrum ZX, and then the next stage, usually in terms of gaming, was the Terminator 2, because computers were incredibly expensive for all of the 90s.
Kooky, super mega expensive.
Like, you wouldn't believe how expensive computers were for all of the 90s. And since we got the Terminator at some time around the mid 90s, that lasted up until well into the 2000s for a lot of us. Again, some of us lucky enough were fortunate enough to have had something happen, or to have had access to an older computer, started getting computers at around the 2000 mark, which is my situation. And we jumped straight from the NES or Terminator to playing computers. We didn't have the 16-bit. There was no real 16-bit era for us.
No, we just sort of even the economy started sort of gearing up a bit more after the 90s, and the supply of like modern things was a lot more abundant than it used to be. So sort of jumped from the 8-bit era to the PlayStation 2 in terms of consoles.
Pretty much in terms of consoles, because that's when once the PlayStation 2 was released, that's when the level of the economy was at a high enough place, and buying power was sufficiently increased so that a certain number, again, not a majority by any stretch of the imagination, not a huge percentage, but a decent enough percentage of people could actually afford to buy either a computer or a PlayStation 2. I knew some people who had a PlayStation 1 and some people who had a Super Nintendo, but these were generally people that dealt, or their parents had businesses that dealt with with foreign countries. So they had those connections that I was talking about. Maybe not so dubious, although still dubious, but they had access to these things from the outside, not from within the country.
I'm curious, did you know anybody that had a more contemporary Sega console from back then, like a Genesis, like beyond Genesis?
Yeah, I had a friend of the family, because I only got to play on it once. It was a Sega Mega Drive 2.
Ooh.
This was, dude, I was so young. This was years before me getting my Famicom. And I got to play Aladdin.
Oh, yeah.
Dude. And
that was like one of the first games I had pre-installed on my PC.
Man, so playing Aladdin when you're, I don't know, I was 8, I think. I was 8 or 9. In post-communist Romania. That was literally, I wouldn't have that experience replicated up until getting to play, I think, a 3D game, like getting to play something like Quake 2. Playing Aladdin at that point was basically me stepping onto another world. So yeah, that did happen, but these were like I said, like super crazy minority. I don't even fuck that. They weren't a minority. They were outliers. They were exceptions to the rule. I would think, due to all of the reasons we've mentioned up until now. But yeah, I did get to play and there was a super cool Indiana Jones on the Sega Mega Drive 2 as well. It was like really, really, really cool. You had the whip and you had the gun, and the whip would swish around stuff and use it as to swing between platforms. There was the the famous scene when the enemy appears with the sword and does the swishy stuff, and you shoot him. Yeah, that happened a lot, but yeah, they replicated that scene as well. So there was, I did get to play, but that was just once. And again, the experience was such a massive thing that I still remember it to this day.
That sounds like it was amazing.
20 something years later, it was, man. It was.
Hopefully, one day we'll run into something new that will give us these kinds of memories again.
I don't know.
Maybe VR would.
I don't think so. I think those types of memories are something that is exclusively relegated to childhood.
Yeah.
Because back then you have a completely different perspective on time. Technically, I mean, as far as you're concerned, time is this slow. It's barely moving. Things seem like they last eons.
Mm-hmm.
Like a summer vacation, a summer holiday, you think lasts the equivalent of 3 years or something like that. It can seem like that back then. Now we have a completely different perspective, and we still have joy, but we get them from different things. And one of the sources is this sort of thing that we're doing right now, talking about those memories, nostalgia. This is why nostalgia is such a big seller right now.
Yeah, it's not,
I don't know.
It's not that things were better then, but we were kids and we like things then.
I don't think, I mean, no real reasonable person says that things were better.
Well, I know a bunch of people that say that
all across the board. There were definitely, sure. People say that a lot because they don't have the perspective or objective view of things perspective. Some things were better. Some things we had no idea could be better. So those were the best that we could have.
Mm-hmm.
But it was mostly because the world was new, because we were young and we had no idea of how anything works, and we had no responsibilities except for fucking school.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's I think that's a big part of it. I think it would be cool, it's right now talking to you, I had an idea, but maybe you'll get to do this because I'm not coming back to the country anytime soon for a long time. Get in touch with Raul and get yourselves a console, and at a certain point meet up and stream some Terminator 2 shit.
Oh, that would be something. Let's see if I can actually get it done. It's a good idea.
Just as a general idea, it would be fun. I think it might not catch on to the Western audience, but it would be fun just to do it,
Mm-hmm.
just to say that you did it. I think that would be a cool thing to work out. You can just, one of you goes to the other guy's place for like a couple of days, or if possible, and you see if you can make something happen.
That is something that is worth exploring.
I definitely think so. That's why I suggested it.
So that was our experience with the NES. It's not what other people like in more civilized countries that were not under the Iron Curtain experience with the NES or with the Famicom, which is it's why I would say that we had a more I wouldn't say richer experience, but it was our own. You can't really say that we had the NES because we had the Terminator. It was like sort of our own thing.
It definitely was, and I would actually like to hear if I'm pretty sure we do have listeners from what used to be the Soviet bloc, and I would really like to hear what their experience was with their Terminators or their Ending Man. What was it called? Endman?
The Ending Man, yeah.
The Ending Man. which I think they were going for the Running Man, because that's another Schwarzenegger movie.
I think it was still the Terminator, but it was made in China, so
Yeah.
Ending Man, Terminator.
And the Terminator, yeah, okay, I can see where they're going. But you could also see that ending could also be like from the Running. Anyway, so in case you were in our situation and grew up in the 90s in a post-communist country and had the Terminator 2, we would definitely love to see what your experience was with them, and also if anything of what we said reminds you of your childhood, because I have the slight impression that it does.
And apparently, as of 2013, it was still being sold in Serbia.
Okay, good to know that we have a source for them, although I think you can still find them in Romania as well.
Yeah, or you can probably get them from Alibaba or something.
Yeah, but you could obviously get them from like some proper second-hand ones, third, fourth, seventh-hand ones in Romania. I think they sell them on the websites and shit like that, on OLX and stuff.
Well, I guess that would be it for the show. Thanks to everybody for
that was a great walk down NES memory lane, man.
Yeah, I get the feeling that I should probably go and play Circus Charlie again.
Maybe, I don't know.
I just like running with that tiger through the hoops. Or track and field.
That's dangerous.
Well, yeah, I also had the American Gladiators game on which I basically ruined 2 gamepads, because in those games you all you had to do was press 2 buttons to do everything, and the faster you press them, the faster you'd go.
Oh, that reminds me of the Olympics games, actually, or other sports games.
Yeah, and track and field did as well, but this one did it to the extreme. I broke 2 gamepads. Fun times. Well, we'll see you again with a new GameTales with a different subject. Don't know exactly what it's going to be about, but hey, we'll see then. Goodbye, everybody.
See you next time.